Ravensrise by Claire Casey. Chapter 10. The roads were dusty and the coach hot. Even coming from the city, where people were forced to live so close together, Taria struggled not to gag at the stench coming from the man sitting next to her. Middle-aged and with the paunch of a drinker, he refused to take his eyes off her. Staring out of the window in the coach's door, Taria refused to look at him, ignoring his attempts to talk to her. Too many men had tried to have their way with her, but there was always ways of dealing with them. Each method had its own merits, and all too often, which one she used depended on the mood that she was in at the time. If he didn't stop trying to talk to her, in his nasally twang, she was certain that he would not last to the end of the journey. He made claims of being more than what he was. There were claims of knowing different lords, and that he would one day come into his own, with lands and titles to boot. They were nothing more than simple lies that Taria saw through as quickly as he opened his mouth. The coach stopped with a shudder. Continuing to look out of the window, she was greeted by the sight of a busy yard, attached to an equally busy inn. Horses were being fed, watered, and readied for the journeys that lay ahead of them. The stablemaster shouted orders to the stable boys. None of them were given a moment's peace. The driver jumped down from his seat and approached the door of the coach as daylight began to fade. "We will be stopping here for the night," he told those who filled the carriage. "You will be warmer inside than in the coach. It'll be more comfortable as well. Get yourself something to eat and to drink. You don't know when we will be stopping next." Stepping down from the coach, Taria sighed as she stretched and walked towards the inn. The sounds of the nearby town wafted towards her. Sniffing the stench made her glance to her side. Her fellow traveller had decided to follow her. His eyes were on her, unfocused from the drink he'd already had in the coach, but they remained unblinking. There was a determination there that Taria recognised and knew to be wary of. She wandered away from the inn. There was plenty of time before the inn shut its doors for the night. Stifling a smile, she allowed the man to follow, leaving him unaware of what lay ahead. People bustled by her as they made their way through the town. All of them were going about their business. None of them paid her the slightest piece of attention. Turning up a side street, Taria could hear the man panting as he tried to keep up with her. In the shadows of the alley, she turned to face him, smiling. "Oh, sweetie, are you waiting for me? I've had my eye on you since Freewill. I've had to wait all this time," the man panted before licking his lips. One of his hands went down the front of his trousers as he walked towards her. His other hand pulled at the fabric of his trousers as he tried to free himself. Allowing him to get closer to her, Taria waited. She could feel the smoothness of her knife's horn handle in her hand. She kept it hidden in the fabric of her skirt. At the right moment, she ducked past him. Doing so, her knife found its mark. The blood sprayed away from her as she cut through the muscle and the fat in his neck. The man tried to make a noise, but his mouth only opened and closed, silently as he fell to his knees, clutching at the hole where his throat had once been. Slumping to the ground, he gurgled his last, as his hand remained holding onto his neck. Blood forced its way through the spaces between his fingers as it continued to bubble between his lips. As his life fled from him, his eyes bulged and stared. Cleaning the blade of her knife on the man's clothes, she returned it to its hiding place. Glancing around her, She left him there, a pool of blood appearing beneath him. No one would come looking for him until it was too late. She'd be safe in Ravensrise soon enough. Sitting in the main room of the inn, Taria stayed close to the fire. Some of the others were telling stories amongst themselves, but loud enough for no one else to hear. My mother saw one of the Fae's hounds when she was just a little girl, one of the men stated. Its fur was like green moss, and it was the size of a calf. Its eyes glowed like burning coal as it snarled at her. She was sure that it was ready to attack her. What did it do then? One of the other men laughed. Did it want to gobble her up? Or did it just lick her to death? Let me finish my fucking story, will you? I'm getting to that bit, the first man replied. My mother hadn't realised that she was being followed by some old bastard that wanted his way with her, and then rob her. The hound ran past her and ripped the bastard's throat out, right in front of her. Seeing the blood everywhere, and the man lying dead on the ground, my mother ran away home and never looked back. Some of those in the pub remained silent as they listened to every word that was being spoken. Others laughed and dismissed the story as nothing more than drunken rambling. Ask anyone here, and they'll all tell you that your mother often had one too many. That just sounds like one of our tall tales, someone else added. Well, I'm sure that you would have one too many as well, if you saw something like that when you're just a bairn, the first man snapped. People laughed, enjoying themselves. Remaining where she was, Taria was happy enough that she was being left alone. The stories that were being told were of no use to what she was doing, but she found them entertaining, nonetheless. His mother wasn't the only one to have seen strange things. I've seen something strange myself. The innkeeper added, as he cleaned some of the tables of empty tankards and food trenchers. Go on then. Don't keep us in suspense. What did you see? Someone asked. I was up at the lake. I remember it was a beautiful clear day and the water was like a mirror. I was only a boy at the time and I'd gone there fishing with a friend, the innkeeper stated. Pausing for a moment, he focused his attention on a stubborn stain on an empty table. Wiping it until it was no longer there, the innkeeper remained silent. Stepping back and tilting his head to one side, the innkeeper folded his cloth away. Walking back to the bar, he ignored the shouts from everyone else to continue with the story. All right, you bunch of fucking ingrates. Can't you have some friggin' patience? I was just getting to that. Just give me a minute, the innkeeper told them. I didn't catch anything that day, but something just nearly caught me. What do you mean by that? Someone asked. What was it you saw? You've got to tell us now. It was as if it just appeared out of nowhere. I heard something stamping on the gravel of the beach. When I looked up, there was this horse standing there, with no saddle on its back and no bridle. There was seaweed in its mane, but it was the most beautiful horse that I'd ever seen in my life. Both me and my friend were captivated by that horse. At first, neither of us could take our eyes off it, no matter what we tried. The innkeeper continued. As he paused again, Taria watched him closely. His eyes were glazing over, as if seeing the past right in front of him. He licked his lips before continuing with the story. My friend walked towards it, saying that he wanted to ride it, that it was obviously that he didn't have any owner. He was going to take it home. The innkeeper told him. It was in that moment that I remembered the story that my old nan had told me, so I held back. I was certain it was a kelpie. A kelpie? One of those water horses that drown folk who try and ride them? One of the others asked. Aye, the same. There is one up in that lake, no matter what I said to my friend. He wanted nothing more than to ride that damn beast. No matter how much I begged and pleaded with him to leave the kelpie be, he just wasn't for having it. He climbed up on the kelpie's back and only realised that I was telling the truth when he realised he couldn't get off. The last thing I saw of my friend was him being dragged into the watery depth by that monster. I can still hear his screams in my sleep, the innkeeper told them. A silence filled the inn's main room, with no one knowing what to say next. No one dared to question the innkeeper, allowing him to get back to his work and pretend that none of it had ever happened. Slowly, quieter conversations began to fill the room. Finishing what was left of her drink, Taria slinked off to where she was going to sleep for the night. There was another long day ahead of her. Climbing back into the carriage, just as the sun was rising, Taria took her place. Glancing at the empty seat across from her, she didn't say a word. As the driver looked in through the open door, he glanced at them all. "We're missing someone," he stated. "Where's the fat man?" "I never saw him after I left the carriage yesterday," one of the passengers told him. "It'll be his own fault then," the driver said. "We're leaving now." Closing and securing the door, he climbed up onto his seat at the front of the carriage. With a crack of his reins, they were off. Looking out of the window, Taria watched as the town disappeared from view.